This is the Italian Real Estate Podcast, here to help you with the ins and outs and basics of Italian real estate, presented by ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. Hello there, and welcome to another edition of the Italian Real Estate Podcast, presented by ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. Of course, we are back at it again with Italian attorney Marco Permunian. How are you doing today?
Good, how are you?
I am doing great, thank you. And in this episode, we wanted to talk a little bit about the flat tax regimes that you can find in Italy. There are a few different programs which you can find for individuals at different stages in life or depending on their circumstances. But Marco, before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about tax residency in Italy and how that all works?
Italy taxes individuals based on residency in Italy. So no matter if you are an Italian citizen or a non-Italian citizen, if you meet certain residency requirements, you will be obligated to pay taxes in Italy. The first requirement that qualifies somebody as a resident from a tax standpoint is to spend more than 183 days in Italy. So if you spend more than basically half a year in Italy, you become liable for taxes. Other than the physical presence requirement, there is also another scenario where you have to pay taxes in Italy, meaning you become liable for taxes, which is if you are registered as a resident. So if you have registered as a resident at an Italian municipality from a legal standpoint, then you will be considered to be a tax resident of Italy. If you are an Italian tax resident, that means that the normal regime will apply to you unless you can opt for one of the flat tax regimes, which we're going to discuss in this episode. And if the normal tax regime applies to you, it means that your income is taxed on the basis of a progressive bracket system where the more you earn, the more you are taxed.
Very interesting. So it sounds like being able to fit within one of these flat tax regimes really would be beneficial. But first, maybe let's talk about the 7% flat tax for pensioners that are thinking about making Italy their home. I know there are some pretty strict restrictions on what can qualify a person for this 7%. And Marco, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
The flat tax regime for pensioners was introduced by the Italian government in 2019, and of course it was meant to attract people from abroad, and more specifically retirees that live abroad, and push them to move their residency to Italy or back to Italy. Let's not forget that this special tax regime not only applies to foreign individuals but also to Italian retirees who have spent time abroad due to maybe excessive Italian taxes on their pensions. So the goal is also to push maybe Italians to go back to live in Italy. And the requirement is definitely not necessarily to be a foreign individual. If you opt for this special tax regime, not only your pension, but any foreign income will be taxed at a 7% flat rate. And the requirement to qualify for this specific tax regime are the following. The individual must receive a pension from a foreign public or private institution. The individual must not have resided in Italy for the previous 5 years. And the individual must establish residency in a town in southern Italy with no more than 20,000 people. Furthermore, it's possible to opt for the 7% tax regime if you decide to establish residency in one of those locations in central Italy that were affected by the 2009 and 2016 earthquakes. And of course, the population of the town in which you establish a residency doesn't need to exceed 20,000 individuals. If you qualify for the 7% tax regime, you can use this special regime for 9 years maximum.
Very interesting, Marco. And just a quick question regarding this 7% flat tax for retirees, for pensioners. Are there any minimums or maximums in place? Like, for example, can they earn only up to a certain amount, or do they have to earn a minimum of a certain amount for this to be applicable?
To opt for the 7% tax regime, there isn't really a minimum or a maximum. However, if you are a non EU citizen who wants to relocate to Italy with the purpose of establishing residency as a retiree in one of the areas that allow individuals to opt for the 7% tax regime, you'd need to obtain a visa, and most likely you will choose the retirement visa, which is meant for people who are pensioners. To apply for the visa, you do need to have a minimum income that is set by the Italian law in 31,000 euros. So you need to apply for the visa through the consulate, and you will only obtain the visa if your passive income is equal to at least 31,000 euros per year. So to answer your question, there isn't really a minimum or maximum limit to opt for the 7% tax regime, but you might have to show at least 31,000 euros worth of passive income if you want to obtain the elective residency visa that allows you to relocate to Italy as a retiree.
I think this is another great reason for those who have been thinking about getting their dual citizenship to think about actually moving forward with that. Because, I mean, I think this is one of those situations where it really shows the benefit of being a citizen of the country, where you don't have to show that minimum amount coming in annually. But what about the flat tax that exists for high net worth individuals? I know there's a special set of circumstances for individuals who kind of fall into this category.
This is another example where you can pay a flat tax instead of a progressive tax rate, and you can opt for this special tax regime, which allows you to pay a 200,000 euros flat tax per year if you are a high net worth individuals, and of course only if it makes sense for you, meaning that if your income is so high that paying 200,000 euros per year is a beneficial situation, then of course it makes sense for you. And this program is evidently meant for people who have a considerable high net worth. Now, it's worthwhile mentioning that the flat tax that is payable in this case was just increased last year in 2024, and it went up from 100,000 euros per year to 200,000 euros per year. Also, it's worth mentioning that if you choose to opt for this special tax regime, the individual must have not been a resident of Italy for 9 years out of the previous 10 years. Now, this regime can also be extended to additional immediate family members, but you are required to pay an additional flat fee of 25,000 euros per year per family member. And finally, this regime can only be used for 15 consecutive years. It applies to Italian citizens and non-Italian citizens, but of course, if you are a non-Italian citizen, you will need to obtain a visa to be able to relocate to Italy and use this special tax regime. A very popular visa option is the investor visa, which is meant for high net worth individuals who invest money in the country. And the minimum investment is 250,000 euros in a startup company or 500,000 in a normal LLC. And it can go up to 1 million or 2 million euros, depending on whether you want to invest on state bonds or philanthropic initiatives. For example, to apply for this visa, you need to do the process through the Italian consulate in your country. However, the process that the government has established for this kind of visa is supposed to be more streamlined than the process that is normally available for either kind of visas, specifically because the government intention was to attract foreign investors to move their residency to Italy with a more practical and quicker visa application process.
Very interesting, Marco. And on this topic of individuals who maybe are on the high net worth individual scale, maybe what about the quote unquote average Joe or Jane? What do things look like for a freelancer in Italy who is looking at the flat tax regime that's set up for them?
If you are a freelancer or a small business owner, you can opt for a special flat tax regime that allows you to pay only 5% in taxes for the first 5 years, which go up to 15% after the first 5 years, but there are certain requirements that need to be met. First of all, your income doesn't need to exceed 85,000 euros per year. If you qualify for the special flat tax regime for small businesses and freelancers, keep in mind that it's not necessary to apply the VAT on your invoices, which is, of course, very beneficial for individuals who have to invoice other individuals because you don't have to add the 22% VAT that otherwise would apply to your invoices. For those who don't know, the VAT is the value added tax, or otherwise known as the sales tax, which is applicable to all services and products that are sold in the country. Another requirement to be able to qualify for this special tax regime, otherwise known as regime forfettario, is not to have received an income from salaries that exceed 35,000 euros in the previous year. And if you qualify for this special tax regime, keep in mind that you will only be taxed, depending on your activity, for a certain percentage of your total income. For example, just to give a general idea, most freelancers will end up paying the 5% or 15% on the 78% of their total income. So again, this special regime, which is called the regime forfettario, is very beneficial for small business owners or freelancers, and it's actually the choice that makes the most sense for people whose income don't exceed 85,000 euros per year.
It really is quite amazing how low this tax rate is. And then, of course, I mean, there's the other factor to consider, that you will have Social Security on top that you also have to pay. And so that does increase things. But if we're talking about having to pay Social Security and tax that you would have to pay in any European country, this is still a lot lower than many other countries in the EU. But Marco, I want to say a huge thank you to you for making yourself available for this episode and to talk to us a bit more about the flat tax options for those who are thinking about making Italy their home. And if anybody is needing help to make Italy their home, purchasing property, or to become a legal resident of the country, how can they get in contact with you and your team?
People can contact us through our website, italianrealestatelawyers.com, or give us a call. Our phone number is on the website.
Absolutely fantastic. And of course, if you're interested in more information like this, be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel as well as the audio only podcast. But of course, if you're subscribed to the YouTube channel, that means you are also automatically subscribed to the Italian Citizenship podcast as well, where we talk about some of the practical aspects of legally making Italy your home. And also, if you're interested in more about life abroad and living abroad from the perspective of a dual citizen expat, be sure to come over to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rafael Di Furia, or you can search for Not Your Average Globetrotter on YouTube, Google, or your favorite podcasting platform. But of course, again, we have been here with Italian attorney Marco Permunian from ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and we will see you all next time. Later.
Thank you.